Okay. Dan, what do you think? Thumbs up? Okay, well, we have a full agenda, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining our Government Affairs Committee meeting for August 20th, 2020. I will be filling in for Michael Simonelli, and hopefully I'll do a good job. We'll try. We'll give it our best. So I'm going to officially call this meeting to order and first ask if there's any new business we would like to discuss later on from the floor. Is there any new business anybody would like to bring up from the floor before we get to our speakers? I know some people may be joining. Real quick, administratively speaking, if you have any comments or questions you'd like to bring up later on, feel free to put those into the chat down below, and Dan will be helping me monitor that a bit. If you have any questions, you could also text Dan or myself, and we'll try to address those in the order in which they come in. Welcome all new and old members. We appreciate your attendance at our Government Affairs meeting. And we're going to go right into Buffalo Mayor Byron Brown as a speaker to tell us a little bit about what he sees in the community landscape of Buffalo. Real quick, Mayor, I'll give you a little intro. The Honorable Byron W. Brown was sworn into his fourth-year term as the 62nd mayor of New York's second largest city in January of 2018. Mayor Brown has been a champion of Buffalo's revival with a vision that embraces inclusiveness, equality, and opportunity. Under his leadership, the city has experienced significant progress with many bold strategic plans. Have resulted in a high-profile economic development projects and job growth in Buffalo. Weaving throughout many of his projects is Mayor Brown's strong and continued commitment to make Buffalo a place where no one is left out and no one is left behind. He is the founding member of the Greater Buffalo Racial Equality Roundtable, which includes more than 30 community leaders from public, private, nonprofits, and faith institutions, conveyed to advance racial equality and promote the change required to accelerate a shared regional prosperity. He continues to work every day to ensure the city of Buffalo is a welcoming place of opportunity and inclusion for all. As the city of good neighbors, and I don't know if the Honorable Byron Brown knows this, I was a neighbor at Canisius College when they allowed me to graduate. So welcome Byron Brown to the floor.
Greg Strauss, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And like speakers say, Greg introduced it just like I wrote it, so I appreciate him for that. It is good to be able to speak with the realtors in our community, Buffalo, Western New York. Thank you for what you do to sell our community. And I want to say a thank you to Dan Lockey for setting up this opportunity for me to speak with you today. We are essentially right now dealing with three crisis situations. So we're dealing with a global health pandemic where over 172,000 Americans have lost their lives, where members of the Buffalo Niagara community have lost their lives to COVID-19, and COVID is still with us. So we can't let our guards down. We have to keep our masks up. We have to continue to follow the CDC guidelines. We're also dealing with a crisis of systemic racism and concerns about police brutality and misconduct. These calls for reform to systemic racism and police misconduct are national and international in nature. I speak with mayors all over the world, and the kind of protests and complaints and calls for Black Lives Matter are not just happening in Buffalo, in the state of New York. in the United States of America, but these protests are actually occurring in communities all across the globe. So again, this is a global phenomenon. And we're also dealing with an economic crisis in this country. The city of Buffalo has lost millions of dollars. The county of Erie has lost millions of dollars because of COVID-19. The state of New York has lost billions of dollars because of COVID-19. And without direct, flexible federal financial assistance, many economists believe that our nation will be plunged into a depression. So it is critically important for city governments, for county governments, for state governments all across the country to get direct financial assistance from the federal government. And whatever your political philosophy might be, whether you live in a quote red state or a blue state, every single American will be affected if the federal government does not take action to address the financial concerns of municipal governments. In fact, it is predicted that if the federal government does not take action, millions of Americans that work in government will lose their jobs all across the country. In Buffalo, we are looking at a $65 million deficit in the current budget year of 2021. If we don't, at a certain point, get federal financial assistance because of the losses that we have suffered in the city of Buffalo because of the pandemic, we will end up probably laying off hundreds of city employees, cutting programs, cutting services, and that will have a ripple effect on the entire region. Now, it is also important to note that because of the impacts on state government has delayed state aid to municipalities. So already at this point, $20 million that was scheduled to come to Buffalo from the state of New York has been delayed. That is contributing to the financial difficulty that we're facing. On the economic front, it's said that nationally there will be a crisis of evictions and a crisis of foreclosure, again, if the federal government doesn't take the proper action to assist the millions of Americans all across this country who have lost their jobs due to COVID-19. In the city of Buffalo, we know that thousands of people have lost their jobs, from laborers all the way to corporate executives. Literally thousands of people in the Buffalo Niagara region are out of work. The city has identified some federal funds that will come to us to help prevent evictions and foreclosures by assisting members of the Buffalo community. We have already used money to assist people who are homeless in this community. Homelessness has risen in the region, and fortunately, the federal government has provided the city of Buffalo, the county of Erie, with assistance that we have been able to use to protect and to shelter homeless people in Buffalo and in Erie County. The calls for reform to policing, the calls to have systemic racism addressed are not new. Racism has existed in this country for over 400 years. The interesting thing about this time is those that are protesting are of all backgrounds. They're Black, they're white, they're Hispanic, they're Asian, they're New American, they're refugee, they're young, they're old. My house was protested 3 times during this period, and the majority of people that came to my house to protest in the city of Buffalo were white young people. Many of them not even from the city of Buffalo, many of them living in the suburbs and very concerned about systemic racism. The city of Buffalo has been a leader in rolling out reforms. We are on the leading edge of announcing and implementing reform in the state of New York and in the nation. We've implemented processes like stop receipts, where officers have to write a receipt explaining why they stop members of the public. They have to provide them with that receipt, and the police department is monitoring the demographic data of the stops in the city of Buffalo to get a better perspective and understanding on why people are being stopped, and to give us the ability to adjust and improve police practices. Appearance tickets. Now people with nonviolent criminal offenses in the city of Buffalo, instead of being arrested and handcuffed in the street, out in the community, in public, they are being given appearance tickets to appear in court. It's still an arrest. It is just a non-custodial arrest. And these two processes are designed to reduce negative physical interactions between our police officers and members of the public. We have also increased transparency. We have posted the entire police department manual of procedure for our police officers on the city's website, as well as the Buffalo Police Department's website, so members of the community can see those things. We're going to be setting up a public protection detail that will work with people that want to peacefully protest in the city of Buffalo. You may or may not be aware of this, but there is peaceful protest that takes place in Buffalo and Erie County and Western New York all the time. One group that protests in our community on a regular basis are members of the peace movement. Those protests are very peaceful, they're very quiet, so you never hear of them. The other thing that we have to be aware of is that not all of the protests that we have seen in our local community in the city of Buffalo, in other cities and communities across the country, have been peaceful. And the media has not always been clear in reporting the correct and accurate information. We've had situations which we were able to reasonably bring under control in the city of Buffalo relatively quickly. When you look at Buffalo versus other cities across the country, where we saw vandalism, where we saw looting, where we saw rioting, where we saw property damaged, where we saw fires set, we have been able to, by meeting with protesters, organized protesters, block club members, small business owners, literally hundreds of meetings that I have held in this community since the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, to listen to people, to let people know that we're hearing them, and to implement some of the sensible reforms and ideas that people have in the city of Buffalo. That has been very helpful to this community. Governor Andrew Cuomo several weeks ago directed all police agencies in the state of New York village, town, city, county, to implement plans for addressing systematic racism in policing. So whether it is the city of Buffalo, the town of Amherst, the town of Cheektowaga, Kenmore, every police agency in the state of New York has to meet with citizens to come up with a plan for reforms that they would make to make policing more equitable and more fair. In the city of Buffalo, we are way ahead and well ahead in this process. And the aggressive and the swift action that we have taken has helped to reduce the protest activity that we're seeing in this community. But it is clear that it will probably spread to other parts of the county and other parts of the region at some point. This is a challenging time for all of us with the three areas of crisis that we're dealing with. You could actually call them three global pandemics that we are dealing with. In the city of Buffalo, we are doing everything that we can humanly do to assist people during this difficult time, to use our resources intelligently and strategically, to partner with other levels of government, to partner with the private sector. But federal leadership and leadership from the federal government and resources from the federal government are needed now more than ever, not just in Buffalo and Western New York, but all across the country. With that, I'm going to conclude my formal comments and listen and respond to the questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Mayor Byron Brown. As we mentioned, if anybody would like to put some questions in the comments, for the time being, we will move on in our process here. Dan will be able to let us know if we have any questions as well. Thank you very much again, Mayor Byron Brown.
Thank you all.
We have.
Excuse me, Greg. I have a question. Well, actually, I had a comment from one of our members. She wanted to know, why don't you place at least a police officer in each of the schools for two reasons. Obviously, for security reasons, and the other would be to somewhat acclimate the students to the police force, and this way there's less fear and more of rapport developed between the students and the police.
We do have police officers in schools in the city of Buffalo. They're called school resource officers. Those officers do donate time to the school district beyond their normal work as police officers. Some of those officers are coaches, some of them are mentors, some of them are tutors, as well as ensuring the safety of school buildings, making sure that the environment around school buildings is safe, and trying to be good role models to our youth. Interestingly enough, here in this community and communities all across the country, there are some activists that are calling for police officers to be removed from schools. They would prefer to see more guidance counselors in some situations, more mental health counselors, and they believe that the mere presence of officers in schools in some cases is a way of criminalizing Black and brown students. Now, the majority of residents that I am hearing from that I have talked to don't share that view, but we are looking at ways to reform how we deliver public safety services, to improve how we deliver public safety services, and let all members of the community know that we are listening to them. But right now, as we speak, we do have school resource officers in schools in the city of Buffalo.
Mayor Brown, John Leonardi, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you, John.
So absolutely reform needs to be made on the police side, but education in the community has to be done as well, right? You and I grew up in the city, and there was always a respect for, police officers and law enforcement. And I think part of that has also been lost. So what are we doing to help, reinforce what we grew up with?
Well, there's a responsibility that government has. There's also a responsibility that residents, citizens have to build these relationships that were very evident when you and I grew up, John. Unfortunately, we are seeing a situation where there are an increasing number of single parent households, households where there is no father in the household, incredible poverty that some young people are growing up in, situations where there is a digital divide, where some young people are living in households where there are no computers, where they don't have access to the internet. To all of us, maybe in this meeting, that's going to sound surprising, but having gone into some of these homes and seeing the poverty that some of our young people, and I might add, of all races, not just Black and brown young people, but white young people in this community too, living in incredible poverty with no access to computers. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of pain that people are dealing with. In fact, surveys of national satisfaction, how people in America feel, how satisfied, how happy we are showing that Americans all over this country are the most unhappy that they have been in over 50 years in the United States of America. So this is not just a Buffalo, Erie County, Western New York phenomenon, it's a national phenomenon. So we've bolstered community policing in the city of Buffalo. We have created a neighborhood engagement team that works with community groups, that helps community groups with fundraising, with sports activities, with academic enrichment activities for our young people. We're really working hard in Buffalo to build the community police relationship back. We work with our neighborhood associations in the city of Buffalo on these issues. But one instance of police misconduct, police brutality, gets such incredible local and in some cases national and global attention. One act of misconduct could wipe out hundreds of positive actions and interaction by police officers in the community. And that is a symptom of the times that we're living in. Things that are inappropriate are lifted up to incredible levels, and the many good things, positive things that so many members of our police department and police officers do all across the country don't come close to getting that kind of attention and publicity.
Mayor, you're going to have to let me know when you have to leave for, I have 4 questions for you. I'll take them one at a time. On a follow-up regarding the police, what is the difference between defunding and unfunding? And what is Buffalo moving towards either of those?
Defunding and unfunding are virtually the same thing. I am not a supporter of defunding the police. The majority of people that live in the city of Buffalo that I have heard from, that I have met with, are not in favor of defunding the police. It is a way of trying to secure reform. It is a way to get reforms in police departments and police agencies. I'm all for reform. I'm all for reining in costs. I'm all for spending money more efficiently. I'm all for controlling overtime expenses, but certainly not in defunding the police. And the majority of residents in the Buffalo community, and from surveys, the majority of people across the country don't want to see police departments defunded. Now, in some communities, police departments have been defunded and new police type agencies have been established to be able to relieve those communities of onerous police contracts, onerous contracts with police unions. So some of the reforms that the community wanted to achieve were achievable. Here in New York State, collective bargaining and the challenges that creates in negotiating sound and sensible contracts with police unions make it very difficult to control costs, to discipline police, to manage police. I will say that 98% of the members of the Buffalo Police Department are doing the right thing. They want to do the right thing. They're there for the right reason. The 2% that is doing things that are examples of misconduct, it's very challenging to discipline those people. So for example, by union contract through collective bargaining, an officer is found guilty of something. Unlike Georgia and other states in this country, you can't fire that officer. That disciplinary process has to go through a collective bargaining arbitration process. So without that arbitration process, that officer cannot just be fired. Also, when an officer does the wrong thing, the maximum time you can suspend an officer without pay is 30 days. Even if the management of the police department feels that officer has done something dramatically wrong, that can't be done. That is also why there is a belief that there should be some national standards for police accountability and police discipline, because from state to state, based on the promulgation of state law, those standards are different.
Let's see, I've got actually two more questions regarding the police and these issues, and then I'll move on about some other issues that are being addressed. Is it possible to have patrols mixed, white officer and black officer? Is that practical?
It would be totally impossible to do that. It would be practical. It could make a lot of sense. Some of the car crews are mixed. Obviously, the units are mixed. There are times that the response is not mixed when officers respond, because again, by union contract and by seniority, the officers have the ability to bid into their assignments. And by contract, officers that have more seniority have a greater ability to select the assignment of their choice. So again, collective bargaining, union contracts that make it challenging to do some of these common sense things that the public would like to see. So sometimes members of the public look at me, or they look at the police commissioner, they look at the police management, and they say, hey, you knuckleheads, why don't you people just do this? And it's because we people just can't do that because of state law and other laws and union protections that have been built up over 50 years in this country.
Would you say the scene in Buffalo where the officer pushed the elder gentleman, which was played over and over and over again, do you think that was overblown, or was it really a picture of what goes on in Buffalo?
It was incredibly overblown. It wasn't a picture of what goes on in Buffalo. We imposed a curfew. And first, let me say, pushing that gentleman was a wrong action. Didn't want to see it. Nobody wanted to see it. The members of the police department didn't want to see it. It was a mistake. It was wrong. It never should have happened. But at that point, a curfew had been imposed by me and the police department in Buffalo to prevent arson, to prevent looting, to prevent rioting, to prevent property damage, to protect protesters. Within the protest groups, there were conflicts. There were people in our community that were here from outside Western New York that had different motives. Not only were they not from Buffalo, they were not from Erie County, they were not from Western New York. So we were trying to control disorder. We were trying to protect people. In fact, even the older gentleman that was pushed by the police earlier in the day, he was almost attacked by other younger protesters. That incident occurred after curfew. And so all of those people that were there at that time were violating the curfew that had been imposed. And that unit is trained to push forward, to move people out of the way. But at that particular point in time, there are actually more police officers than protesters. And what our police management always says to our officers is use common sense. There was no reason to push that elderly gentleman. What the proper procedure would have been to hand him back to the line that was advancing and to actually arrest him if he was refusing to leave when the officers gave him a reasonable request to leave during an imposed curfew. That's actually what should have happened. He should not have been pushed. Now, globally, it was reported that I called the elderly gentleman an agitator, and that was a misreport. That was an error. A local news station that was part of a gaggle of news people asking me like 24 different questions actually misreported that. And that misreporting got picked up all over the world in sensational fashion, that the mayor of Buffalo called an elderly protester an agitator. I did not. The local news source finally, after more than a week, corrected their error and said they were wrong, gave me the opportunity after they said that they were wrong to come on and talk about it. Some of the national and global sites reported that it was an error, but the report that it was an error those were not as explosive as the initial reports that I called the elderly gentleman a protester. The other thing that people should know is it looked like he was not given any medical attention. That emergency response team unit has medics embedded with the unit. So just a couple of people behind, there were medics that were also advancing who were there to render assistance to any injured police officer and any injured member of the community. And it was those police medics that actually within seconds rendered medical assistance to that gentleman and got him into an ambulance. So the whole thing was blown out of some proportion and misreported. Was it a wrong action? Absolutely. Was it lacking in common sense? Absolutely. Should those officers have been suspended for that action? Yes. Should they have been charged with a crime? Legal experts that I have talked to don't believe that they should have. And they believe that when that finally goes to court, the action that the district attorney took to charge them with a crime will not stand up in a court of law based on the laws of New York State and the protections that are afforded to police officers.
Okay, as a segue to start moving away from this subject, would you consider the 15-mile-per-hour school speed trap over-policing, and will the city continue to balance the budget by policing?
Well, first of all, it's not a speed trap. I don't consider it over-policing. Parents throughout the city of Buffalo, residents throughout the city of Buffalo have indicated that they don't want speeding past schools in the city of Buffalo. In our community, children have been struck by vehicles. Children have been killed by vehicles. People have the ability to slow themselves down when they're driving past schools where children work. We've studied it with traffic engineers. It doesn't add that much more time to people's travel time. But we're living in a society where everyone is in a hurry. Some people are in a hurry to absolutely go nowhere. And it puts children, it puts parents, it puts teachers, it puts school personnel at risk. And also, I might add, it's a $50 violation. It's not a moving violation. It doesn't put points on someone's license. And this is done in many other parts of the country, including the suburbs. And it was done in response to requests and complaints by members of the public in the city of Buffalo. In New York City, they have the same process, and those cameras are actually on all day from 6 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. And in New York City, it generates over $65 million annually in the New York City, in the city of New York. So we're just trying to protect children in our community. This was only for school hours in the city of Buffalo. Children frequently are in and out of school buildings. Adults are frequently in and out of school buildings, and it was to be protective of our children. Unfortunately, this was a situation where the city council ran ahead of the intense research that the administrative branch of government did in looking at how this is implemented in many different parts of the country. And in setting the school speed zones, they also made it a situation where police officers can write the ticket. And anything over 15 miles an hour, a police officer can write a ticket for every mile you go over that 15-mile-an-hour speed limit. That was not my intent as the mayor of Buffalo, but that was something that the city council did that has had unintended consequences. But we've also seen people driving past schools in the city of Buffalo at 50 miles an hour, at 60 miles an hour. So this is to slow motorists down. This is to protect people in our community. We don't see it as a money grab at all. And you actually, with the speed zone camera, you don't get ticketed until you're driving 26, you don't get the violation until you're driving 26 miles an hour, not 15. And so the city council should really work with the administration to improve this so that we no longer have police officers writing tickets for this. And it's simply a camera violation at 26 miles an hour in a school zone.
On another subject, internet speed seems to be an issue keeping people from moving here. What has the city been doing to improve our internet infrastructure?
Well, that's very challenging. That is an issue that is also wrapped up in corporate America. So Verizon initially, in building out the suburbs of Western New York, refused with FiOS to build out certain parts of the city of Buffalo. Met numerous times with representatives of Verizon about FiOS. It comes down to the cost of installing the infrastructure, which they have been unwilling to do. So we continue to hold those conversations with them. There have been complaints about spectrum service. We meet with them frequently to have them address concerns about their service and reliability that city residents have. There's also a new company, Greenlight, that Tom Golisano, the former owner of Paychex and the Buffalo Sabres, is a partner in, that wants to bring internet service into the city of Buffalo. Later this week, I have a meeting with Mr. Golisano and his management team to talk about that, which might, through competition, put more pressure on Charter Spectrum to improve their service, and might encourage more companies to look at coming into the marketplace. But what we find from a corporate perspective, cable companies coming into new markets is challenging.
All right, Mayor, last question. Before I give it to you, I just want to thank you personally. I know how busy your schedule is, and thank you very much for taking all this time with us. Last question, what are your feelings about charter schools and the opportunity for parents to have another choice for their children?
I am supportive of parents' choice, of school choice. The majority of our children are in the traditional public school form of education. So I am a real proponent of improving the traditional public school form of education, where the majority of children in the city of Buffalo and other areas of the community receive their education. But I'm not an opponent of charter schools. I speak at charter schools all the time, meet with charter school parents from time to time, and many of the city's youth programs obviously support the needs of children that are in all forms of education, whether it's traditional public school, charter school, private school, or parochial school. I think parents having choices very critically important. I would also say that during this difficult time, the city has supported restaurants and other small businesses. We have supported economic development projects like Seneca One Tower moving forward, which is going to be an absolutely amazing development for the city of Buffalo. There's more affordable housing coming online in the city of Buffalo. And as realtors, you probably know that the city housing market is very hot. It's incredibly competitive. There are bidding wars over houses in all parts of the city, whether it's north side, south side, west side, or east side. People want to be in the city. We're working now to bring more home ownership opportunities online in the city of Buffalo. And I look forward to being in touch with BNAR to share some of those new housing developments and new housing investments that are going to be coming online in the city.
Greg?
Perfect. Again, thank you very much, Mayor Byron Brown. A lot of really good insight there. Okay, so moving on to Zach Rubin McCary, our political representative for the National Association of Realtors. Zach has been works with the National Association of Realtors as a political representative for a group including 9 states. One of them obviously being New York. At NAR, it's like coming back home for Zach. His first job in politics was an internship at the Government Affairs Department at NAR while he was in college. Zach is a Washington, D.C. native, and graduate of the Ohio State University. Outside of work, you'll find him cooking, traveling, and cheering on the sports teams from his hometown or alma mater. Welcome, Zach. How are we doing at NAR?
No, doing well. I like to start all of these off with the disclaimer that there is a construction site about 50 feet from where I'm sitting. So if you do hear loud banging or sawing or anything like that, there are some condos going in over there. So they look like they'll be very lovely, when they're done. But I eagerly await for that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick to show you some slides I put together. I just wanted to kind of give you all an update of everything going on here in DC. Firstly, for those of you I haven't met yet, my name's Zach Rubin McCary. I'm your NAR political representative. It's basically my job to be a resource for you all, as well as the staff for your local boards and state boards on all things NAR federal advocacy. So if you ever have any questions, that's my email address on there. I'm always happy to chat. And I don't always know the answer, but I'm happy to hunt it down for you. The first thing, I think I brought this up last time I talked to you all, but continue to use this as a resource. NAR's coronavirus resource page. It's just nar.realtor/coronavirus. We are updating this daily. We recently redesigned it. It's a lot easier to use now. We have walkthroughs on all the major pieces of legislation, which I'll talk about in a little bit, as well as, suggestions on how to open up your business safely, on how, if you're a local association, how to handle that. There's also videos on there on how to apply for loans and how to apply for forgiveness and what all of this means and for you and your business. So there's a lot of great resources. I know they're working on some more to put up there. So definitely check back there regularly. There's, broker focused stuff. There's, agent focused stuff. There's a lot of different things on there. So it's definitely a really good place to check out. All right, so just kind of, taking a look at, what we're going to cover today. I just mentioned some of the NAR resources. I'll take a look at the political landscape here in DC, take a look at the activity on, coronavirus response, because that's been the big thing lately. Also look at future legislation. There were also a few executive orders, and then there's the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which has also been a hot topic as of late. As I mentioned earlier, we have, a bunch of resources on that page. We have stuff on, SBA loans, stuff for housing providers, a lot on there about evictions, unemployment assistance, how to apply for that. Obviously now with, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but some of the benefits have expired. So, there's information about that. Also a lot of mortgage finance questions. I know I've talked to a lot of people a lot of members that their clients are having a lot of questions about this. We are updating those regularly with what we're hearing back from credit agencies as well as the administration. So a lot of good stuff there to check out. The other thing, this started early on, it's called Right Tools Right Now. There's webinars, there's education courses, other resources on there that are normally cost more money. They're either being provided free or at cost to our members. So this is a great opportunity if there's some CE you were thinking about or an accreditation you were thinking about. This, a lot of these are really heavily discounted now. So it's definitely worth checking out. It's just nar.realtor/right tools right now. All right, so jumping into the political landscape. So if you've turned on your TV the last few days, you've probably realized that the Democrats are currently having their political party convention this week. I believe it's concluding. Most of the programming is concluding this evening. The Republicans are scheduled for next week. As a result of that, most of the activity and energy is focused on that. So, a little bit less energy on the legislative side of things, and we'll get to that. I think, it's worth keeping this in mind. Once we get closer to the election, there's less and less motivation for people on either side to try and get a deal done and help the other side, give them something that they can go shop to voters and say, hey, look at me, I've gotten all this done. So, it's definitely presenting a challenge. But obviously with a presidential election coming up, everybody in DC, all the major office holders are up for re-election. I will also stress NAR, we do not endorse in the political or in the presidential race. We do endorse in Senate and House races, but we do not endorse at the presidential level. This has been the case for as long as I know, mainly because we ultimately have to deal with whoever's in the administration. Not much different than you all. You don't have the luxury of only selling to people of one party. You have to sell to whoever you encounter and whoever's on the other side of the table. So we take that very seriously. And if you ever have any questions about that, I'm always happy to talk about it. So kind of taking a look back on, the various bills that have passed in relation to the COVID response. The first one, which, is kind of commonly called Phase 1, this bill was just mainly an appropriations bill. This passed in February of this year. Basically, this provided a bunch of extra funding for the National Institute of Health and the military and the CDC to really ramp up looking at the coronavirus. I think this is kind of when Congress realized, okay, this thing's pretty serious. We need to make sure we're pumping some money into this so we can try and get ahead of it. The Families First Act passed in March. This was a little bit more focused on expanding family and medical leave and more on the employment side. The big one that we engaged on, we engaged on the previous ones a little bit, but the CARES Act was the real big program that, or I should say a list of programs that came through. Some of you may recall this bill was $2 trillion, that's with a T. $2 trillion bill. It's the largest piece of legislation money-wise that's ever passed through Congress. It included things like creating the Paycheck Protection Program. That's the loan program that provides loans to help keep businesses, solvent and paying their payroll. It expanded economic injury disaster loans. Really importantly, a big win for NAR in this was making sure that independent contractors were included in this program, in both of those programs and the pandemic unemployment assistance, which I'll get to in a second. They were not originally included, and we made the convincing argument to people on both sides of in the House and the Senate that basically, you need to include independent contractors in this, and this is why they are a huge part of our economy. And, given, the coronavirus, they're going to be feeling the hurt in this as well. So thankfully we got them in. It did not stop there. We had to work with the administration. These sorts of programs typically did not apply to independent contractors. So things that they normally need to do, like verifying income and, to figure out how much of a loan people qualify for, they had no real understanding of how our members make their money. So we had to work with them to, help them figure these things out to make sure resources were available for independent contractors. In addition to that, this authorized an additional $600 a week in pandemic unemployment assistance, or PUA, as it's commonly referred to. This provision, it did expire at the end of July. I will get to this in a bit, but it is a little bit of a point of contention in ongoing negotiations. Beyond that, there were two subsequent pieces of legislation. These primarily just provided additional funding for the Paycheck Protection Program, which ran out of funding, I think it was in 9 days. So, it shows the kind of demand there was for help after, governments were forced to shut down a lot of, local and state economies. In New York, I know you all were some of the first that had to deal with this. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Also wanted to include some of the commercial activities, some of the things on that front. Again, as I mentioned before, including independent contractors in the PPP program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Those were big wins. There was some targeted tax relief, the Employee Retention Tax Credit, as well as the Qualified Improvement Property Technical Correction. This is left over from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. They just stuck that in there because this was something that everybody agreed needed to happen. It essentially deals with how depreciation is handled on commercial properties when there's a qualified improvement to the property. And then the other two things, we were one of the first organizations to voice to the administration and pushed very hard on was making sure that there were extensions of the deadlines for 1031s and opportunity zones, because we realized, when the economy slows and stops and shuts down like it did, it makes it very hard to execute those transactions. So we were successful in that as well. All right, so looking ahead, I'd say even probably about 2 weeks prior to all the conventions starting, which, you've seen both sides reach an impasse on where they'd like to go with the negotiations. The House Democrats, they put out a bill called the HEROES Act about 2 months ago. That bill was a $3 trillion plan that dealt with everything from including pandemic unemployment assistance at the current levels of $600 a week to more direct assistance for businesses. It also had rental assistance, which is a big issue for us at NAR. It provided a lot of funding to states and municipalities to help plug budget holes, which is another big priority for NAR. The Senate, on the other hand, they have introduced a bill, this is a couple weeks ago, that is only $1 trillion. It has less money for the pandemic unemployment assistance. I believe it was $300 in their plan. So there's a $2 trillion gap between just the House and the Senate. On top of that, the president is advocating for a number of things, one of which is a payroll tax cut, which the Republicans in the Senate are not a big fan of. So even on the Republican side, there are some disagreements. I think the big thing to keep in mind with all of these, you're looking at a government spending deadline. The government only has enough spending or money authorized, I should say, to keep the government open until September 30th. So as you may recall, every year around September 30th, we always get to talk about the flood insurance program being extended or possibly lapsing. This year is no different. But on top of that, there obviously are a lot of important things with the coronavirus and response to that. My guess, just having seen this story play out a few times before, is given that you have conventions for the Democrats this week and the Republicans next week, and then you're starting to get into Labor Day, My guess is you won't really start seeing negotiations pick back up until after Labor Day. And then, you know, knowing them, they'll probably do what's called a continuing resolution to fund the government for a set amount of time. In an election year, it's usually to, you know, December, or at least till after the election, so people can get a little bit more courage when they're not facing voters, or maybe they've lost and you know, they feel a little bit more free to vote how they like. So I'm guessing that's probably what's going to happen. Now, if that might include additional funding for coronavirus response, it might not. Both sides are pretty far apart on these issues. In addition to that, the president, about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, right after the negotiations kind of stalled, he issued a few executive orders to try and jumpstart those negotiations. A lot of these issues, these executive orders, I will say broadly, they're going to face legal challenges. So when you hear about these, just kind of take them with a grain of salt, knowing that, you know, he is trying to address them, but these issues, but there are going to be substantial legal challenges to them. The first one, the payroll tax executive order, this would basically let people not pay payroll taxes, but then they'd have to pay back whatever they would owe. So a lot of accountants, I've seen a lot of accountant, you know, associations that have asked if they can just continue paying as normal, because, you know, their clients would potentially be on the hook for a larger bill down the road. So this bill, you know, for that one, I think there's kind of some mixed views on what that actually means. The pandemic unemployment executive order, this has impacts for states. So the president basically took money that was in a different pot of funds appropriated in Congress, which there are going to be challenges on this, because in the past, you know, Congress doesn't like money that they budgeted for something else and used for not being used for what they budgeted for. So there'll be a challenge there. The other challenge here is the president only allocated for $300, which is essentially 50% of what the benefit was before, but then has a strong encouragement to states to pick up the slack and provide an additional $100. So if you have states facing budget holes, asking states to provide an additional $100 per unemployment recipient can be a lot and would be a challenge and could exacerbate some of these budget issues. And then the eviction and housing executive order, you know, NAR, our position on eviction moratoriums is it's just delaying the issue. We think if you are going to do this, it needs to be married up with rental assistance, because landlords and property managers, they still have financial obligations, and we'll get this more in a second. All right, so NAR's priorities. So I alluded to a lot of these before, but a few of the top line ones: more funding to the SBA programs, the Paycheck Protection Act, the Economic Injury Disaster Loans, remote notarization. There were, I believe, 43 different states that took some sort of action on this, whether it was passing legislation, an executive order, which I believe New York was in that boat. But every state has a little bit different you know, requirements for this. This bill at the federal level would just set a floor on this technology and what's required of remote notarization tech. It would also provide a little bit more certainty for mortgage companies who have to operate in different states. Having a baseline makes it a little bit easier for them to implement this technology. Mortgage liquidity, this is something that we're increasingly worried about. I'd say early on in the coronavirus, we were really concerned about people not being able to pay their mortgages and what this could mean in the secondary market and you know, the rest of the economy. The pandemic unemployment assistance, that's $600 additional every week. Our research has shown this will help keep people in their homes and help keep people able to pay rent. So we would like to see that continued because it's helping to avoid a you know, major crisis there. Property owners and landlords, as I mentioned, we are pushing hard for rental assistance. You know, and our position is any eviction moratorium, as I mentioned. Yes.
And real quick,
Hello?
you're just kind of breaking up a little bit, and I think it's hard for some of our members to hear. I'm not sure if it's your internet. It's just really breaking up. Dan, are you hearing that?
I'm
Yeah.
having trouble hearing the question.
Your internet, I think your internet connection is a little slow. Let's see, should we?
Okay.
Yeah, some of our members can't seem to hear. Let's see, I hate to just.
Hold on, would this be?
You there, Dan? What do you think? Can we, what would you like us to do here?
Zach, any chance you could correct what the sound? I mean, if you can't correct the sound, then we've got to move on.
Dan, this is Mike. It might work if he logs off the call and rejoins again, and maybe that could help.
Okay, Zach, why don't you log off, and then when you come back on, we'll let Mike go next, and then when you come back on, you can continue and close out your talk. Okay? Nod yes.
Okay. All right. Well, so for the time being here, we will take a technology detour, and I'll introduce Mike Kelly real quick, and Mike, we'll have you speak for a moment. And I think Zach's close to his end. If he comes back in and can talk, but if not, we'll just keep going here. So for all of the membership, welcome Mike Kelly, the New York State Association of Realtors Director of Government Affairs. Prior to joining the New York State Association of Realtors Government Affairs Department in 2001, Mike worked for 8 years as the New York State Assembly, directing communication efforts for several assembly members, and served as staff for the Ways and Means Committee. Mike became a director of government affairs in 2008. NYSAR's Government Affairs Department helps to formulate and implement the association's annual legislative and political agenda, and to manage the Realtors Political Action Committee, otherwise known as RPAC, issues mobilization fund, and the association's independent expenditure efforts. The department is also responsible for assisting local boards in achieving their political and legislative goals. Mike's a proud graduate of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and lives outside of Albany, New York with his wife, Beth, and 2 kids. Welcome, Mike. What's going on in Albany? Oh, you're a little muted there. Hold on. Unmute.
Yeah, I got you. Sorry about that, Greg. Well, thank you, first of all, Greg, for not butchering the pronunciation of my alma mater. I call that a win already.
Thank you.
I will say, first, thank you. It's great to see everybody. I wish we were in person. I always enjoy the opportunity to get together with BNAR, in particular out in Western New York. Dan and John are, routinely kind enough to invite me out to your in-person meetings there. So, that's one thing that, you do notice in the midst of the pandemic. The last thing anybody needs is another Zoom meeting, number one. And nobody really wants to see the wall of my dining room. And I've asked my 2 college-age kids to tone it down as best they can in the midst of this. So there are no promises there because we're in the midst of trying to move them to Binghamton tomorrow morning. So fingers crossed that works, because I think we're all at our wits' end here at 47 Silver Creek in Selkirk, New York. So I will say, on a personal note to Mayor Brown, boy, do I miss that kind of thoughtful comments and rational thinking from state lawmakers. You'll hear kind of that in a little bit more about that in a minute. I think, look, all communities in our country right now are facing a lot of the challenges that BNAR is and that Buffalo is. But I will say, this is me personally, I think you're fortunate to have Mayor Brown. I wish we had more of his type of lawmaker in Albany right now. And unfortunately, we don't. Look, I think his presence on your call for 45 minutes, right, is a tremendous testament to BNR's efforts to build that relationship over the last 15 years. And I think you should be applauded for that. So congratulations to you. So let's talk about what's happening in Albany, some notable issues, people, groups, things like that. As the mayor touched on, it's not possible to talk about government at any level right now without talking about revenue streams and taxation and the loss of taxation. It's important because it gives us a backdrop when we look at what the governor and the legislature, frankly, are up to. Right now, we're in the midst of a $10 to $15 billion hole for this fiscal year. The governor's recent projections and the New York State Division of Budget recent projections are $65 billion in the hole over the next 4 years due to the pandemic, and Mayor Brown touched on that earlier. The New York State Division of Budget is going to have to readjust the state budget spending plan probably numerous times. It's just a question of how many times they do it and by how much. Localities and school districts are already trying to address a withholding that they're already facing right now. So it's a withholding of a payment by New York State to school districts and local governments of 20% right now, and they're bracing for further withholding and possible cuts. And as Zach noted, we continue to wait to see if there's some sort of agreement in Washington, D.C. To provide that aid to states and localities to help them get out of this pandemic, because the state of New York, the city of Buffalo can't print money, D.C. can. The governor. Well, the governor is experiencing record high approval ratings. They're not as high as they were back in April, where he was at 77%, but just this morning I looked, I think July and August numbers were around 60%. So if you're the governor and you've got 60% of New Yorkers supporting you, I think you're in a good place. And I think you can see that in his press conferences, right? He's upbeat. We've flattened that curve. He's spoken to that. These numbers are the highest of his entire tenure. So he's got about 2/3 of New Yorkers thinking that New York and the governor are both on the right track and doing a good job. His daily crisis briefings during the pandemic became national news and a must-see. I can't tell you how many counterparts that I had across the country reach out to me to talk about those, to find out how we were handling things like that. The legislature, on the other hand, is a different story. So throughout the pandemic, they've also watched these briefings by the governor, and the legislature has been trying to figure out some way to be relevant as the governor has simply sucked the oxygen out of the room over the last 3 to 4 months. Right now, I think there are two prominent legislative budget challenges that we face as a state between now and Election Day. One is rent and evictions. State lawmakers and the governor have been struggling on how to address this very real, and you folks know this, right? So if you're in property management at all, or you own real estate at all, government's trying to figure out a way to address the very real inability of both residential and commercial tenants to make that rent payment, to pay rent. Just this morning, I saw a story about a mall here, Crossgates Mall in Albany, New York, where 8 tenants are now being sued by the landlord, by the mall, because they didn't make their rent payment. Tenant advocates, social justice groups, democratic socialists, and other groups on the far left have been and continue to advocate for an outright rent strike, right? Eliminating it completely and pushing lawmakers to ban evictions and, you've seen this in news, quote, cancel rent. Pushing back against this have been organizations like NYSAR, like REBNY, like the RSA, the Rent Stabilization Association, like CHIP, like the Long Island Association, the Long Island Builders, and the New York State Builders. The good news is, to date, the legislature has not succumbed to that. They haven't taken that extreme position and extreme stance to cancel rent. And I think, thank God, there's actually been somebody listening in state government to organizations like ours that are saying, listen, you can cancel rent, but that only takes care of one half of the problem, one half of the equation. And you can't address that unless you're both taking care of, both on the residential and commercial side, the tenant as well as the landlord. So in mid-June, the legislature passed the Tenant Safe Harbor Act. The governor signed into law on June 17th. The law essentially extends an executive order imposing an eviction moratorium for residential tenants as long as there are coronavirus restrictions in place, such as the executive orders restricting business activity. More recently, just last week, a new directive was issued by the New York State Chief Administrative Judge that mandates that no existing or new residential eviction warrants to be executed until October 1st at the earliest, pushing that back even further. So not only does it say you can't effectuate an eviction for people impacted by COVID, it's saying you can't effectuate an eviction, period, even if it was in the hopper in early February for that person that didn't pay rent, let's say, for the prior 3 months. The second big issue I think that we're facing in Albany is a legislature that's in search of revenue enhancers. So the legislature right now is discussing ideas like higher income taxes on what they deem as the uber rich, people making maybe, let's say, more than $5 million a year. They're now talking about a pied-à-terre property tax on non-residents of New York City. This bill is gaining support among lawmakers. So that would be a tax, New York City specific, on non-residents of New York City that own property worth $5 million or more. They're talking about imposition of possible stock transfer tax and increases on corporate taxation in New York State. To date, the governor has said no to that he does not believe that increasing taxes on the wealthy is the way out of this pandemic. He doesn't believe that's going to dig you out of a hole. And I think he's correct in saying that high wealth individuals, they're the people that have the ability to pack up and leave more than, let's say, middle income people like myself do, right? I'm entrenched here. It'd be difficult for me to say, New York's raising taxes, I have to get out and I'm going to leave. Well, that's harder to do. But if you're ridiculously wealthy and New York State says we're going to impose an additional 20% tax on your income, folks, be careful what you ask for, because those people are going to go to Boca or to California or to Texas or to more, tax-friendly havens like that. I think we have to see what happens here, because both majorities in the state assembly and the Senate seem comfortable and have discussed possibly overriding the governor on this. They did it on Amazon, and they also did it on changes to rent regulations, which we saw back in 2019. I think if it comes down to cuts in schools and labor and essential services, the legislature may pass revenue drivers and send them directly to the governor to force his hand. We will have to see. Right now, they don't have the votes to override a gubernatorial veto, but they might soon, and they might after November's elections, which leads us to the next thing I want to talk about, elections in New York State. The June primary elections taught us a few things, I think. One, with so many people voting by absentee, I think you can expect the same, just like we did in June, I think you can expect in November, there are going to be a lot of races that are going to remain unclear. We're not going to know who the winner is until long after Election Day and Election Night on November 3rd. Number two, there were tremendous inroads in those June primaries made by Democratic socialist-backed candidates in New York State. Of note is the defeat of at least 7 well-entrenched incumbent Democrats in the state legislature by political newcomers backed by the Democratic Socialists of America and or the Working Parties or the Working Families Party. At the federal level, these trends also continued. Long-time serving Representative Elliot Engel, in office since 1989, was defeated by newcomer Jamal Brown with strong backing by the Democratic Socialists for that Bronx and Westchester congressional district. Mr. Bowman surely is going to walk into office come the November election as well. He's certainly to win. Also, winning the 8-way Democratic primary to replace longtime serving Nita Lowey and represent the 17th congressional district in the Hudson Valley was Mondaire Jones, another political newcomer, defeating multiple well-known state lawmakers in the process, including Senator David Carlucci and Assemblyman David Buchwald. He is also expected to cruise to victory in November. These Democratic Socialist candidates all won on platforms that current and incumbent Democrats, including Governor Cuomo, by the way, weren't doing enough on issues such as single-payer health care, raising taxes on the wealthy, legalizing marijuana, furthering criminal justice reforms, combating climate change, housing justice issues like the ones we care about, such as good cause eviction and cancel rent initiatives. So looking forward towards November, here are some federal races to watch. I think we need to keep an eye out for Pete King's open seat in Long Island, Republican Assemblyman Andrew Garbarino running against Democrat Jackie Gordon for that Long Island congressional district. In Central New York, John Katko's defense against Democratic challenger Dana Balter in that Syracuse 24th congressional district. Anthony Brindisi versus Claudia Tenney. This is a rematch of the race a couple of years ago for that Mohawk Valley, that district just to the east of Buffalo in the 22nd congressional district, and Max Rose, Representative Max Rose versus Assemblywoman Nicole Malliotakis, Representative Max Rose, Democrat versus Republican Assemblyperson Nicole Malliotakis for that Staten Island, Brooklyn-based 11th district. And then in Western New York, the rematch of the June primary, Chris Jacobs versus Nate McMurray. I think the question there is, can Mr. McMurray change course, do anything different after his defeat in June? And is that enough to win in the general election? We will have to see. Some state legislative races to watch in Western New York. These are races to fill open seats. So the Senate seat formerly held by now Congressman Chris Jacobs, Republican Josh Mertzliff, and I apologize if I butchered his name, against Democratic Assemblyman Sean Ryan. In the Senate 61st District, formerly held by Michael Ranzenhofer, you have Republican Ed Rath versus Jacqueline Berger from the Democratic side of the aisle. And then the 149th Assembly District, formerly held by Assemblyman Sean Ryan, that is now open, Republican Joseph Totaro versus Democrat Jonathan Rivera. New York's RPAC trustees are meeting both September 1st and then during the NYSAR virtual business meetings later in September to make decisions about 21 open races. Actually, it might be 22 now, open races across New York State. So obviously our plate is full. The good news is in this process, we're a realtor trade association. We are driven in large part by a process. The good news in this perspective is the RPAC trustees reach out to local boards from those legislative districts and ask, for example, in the races I just mentioned, we're going to be asking BNAR's position, and do you have a candidate you would support over another in those races? And then the trustees take that as part of that equation in making their decision. Sadly, though, none of these races are going to change Albany's power dynamic. First, let me be very clear. Both houses of the state legislature are going to be dominated by Democrats by wide margins after the November elections. The Assembly is currently 106 Democrats to 41 Republicans with 3 vacant seats, and that is not going to change in my lifetime. The state Senate, after the 2018 elections, there were 40 Democrats and 23 Republicans. Of those 23 Republicans that got elected in 2018, 12 of them are either retiring or moving on to other opportunities. For example, Mr. Jacobs or Mr. Ranzenhofer. Republican candidates across New York State face 2 major hurdles. One, they have an enrollment disadvantage to Democrats, frankly, doing a better job in the past couple years of getting more Democrats enrolled to vote. And then number 2, very importantly, is money. As of the July 15th filing with the New York State Board of Elections, the Senate Democratic Campaign Committee had $5.2 million of cash on hand. Senate Republicans, on the other hand, had a woeful $589,000, or roughly 1/10 of that amount. Unfortunately, that financial disparity is most likely to continue throughout the fall and into the November elections. Money doesn't guarantee you wins in campaigns and elections, but it sure doesn't hurt. If I'm running for office, I want to be the candidate that has a 10-to-1 financial advantage over my opponent. So what am I watching out for in the legislature over the next several months, in particular after those elections? Can mainline most often liberal Democrats in the legislature, in particular in the state assembly, hold off pressure and a push to even further to the left by candidates that were backed by the Democratic Socialists of America. And how much of an inroad do those DSA candidates make? And number two, do Senate Democrats reach the 2/3 veto-proof majority that I had mentioned earlier, that threshold of 42 members after this November's elections? Remember, they're at 40 right now. They would only need to pick up 2 more seats to reach that threshold. I'll wrap up with a few other things regarding our challenges and priorities for real estate and NYSAR for the rest of 2020 and 2021 looking forward. New York State now has a permissive state law that allows the imposition of rent regulation in any municipality in New York State. That means any city, town, or village can impose rent regulation after achieving a very, very low bar. That, by the way, doesn't even include going to voters in your community. So we're watching out for those fights that could be popping up in the cities of Rochester, in Kingston, and Beacon, and Albany. There was one that was being discussed in the city of Kingston several months ago, but unfortunately, the good thing for us is it didn't reach they have to do a vacancy study, and in the city of Kingston, they didn't reach that 5% vacancy, quote, emergency threshold that's required of the law. The second thing we're watching out for is community preservation fund proposals. We have one right now that we're working with the Ulster County Board of Realtors as they're pushing back on a community preservation fund proposal, which sounds terrific. Everyone likes community preservation, clean water, farmland preservation, open space preservation. We're all on board. We as realtors have concerns with the funding stream for that because it imposes a additional real estate transfer tax of up to 2%. So we're working with our local board in that fight to oppose that because it's going to be on the November ballot for residents of the town of New Paltz. I had mentioned earlier good cause eviction. This was part of the package of rent law changes that were passed in June of 2019. The good news for realtors and for NYSAR is that we were able to fight and push back against that and make sure that it wasn't part of the package that got finally approved and signed into law. The negative and flip side to that is housing and tenant advocates, not just in New York City, but across all of New York State, including Buffalo, including Erie County, are continuing to push for this good cause eviction law and standard in New York State. What it really means is the bill lines out about 11 ways that you could evict a tenant. And absent one of those 11 ways, for example, destroying the apartment or I don't know, being a drug dealer in your apartment, you couldn't evict that tenant forever. So we have concerns with that law on multiple fronts. Increases on real estate transactions at the state and local level. As I had just mentioned, if we're going to be in a $65 billion hole over the next 4 years as a state, how do we dig out of that? The concern for us is to keep an eye on increases in the real estate mortgage recording tax and the increases in the real estate transfer tax, both at the state level and the local level as well. We're continuing to monitor this push by organized labor to get more independent contractors turned from an independent contractor status to an employee-employer status. Why does that impact us, right? So you think, well, that's only dealing with Grubhub delivery people or Uber or Lyft. Well, right now that's right. But the concern for us is I want to make sure that you as real estate, as realtors, as real estate licensees, maintain that independent contractor status and we don't turn our business practice into an employer and employee type of business, that type of business model. And then we'll also be, the trustees, as I mentioned, are going to be working on making decisions in those 21-22 open races. And really, I think the challenge for us is to try and navigate an all Democratic New York State government. So governor, attorney general, comptroller, Senate, assembly, and find avenues and opportunities to support moderate and business and real estate friendly Democrats. That's one of the overall 10,000 foot level challenges that we're working on. And that's one of the things that the trustees are going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks when we make decisions about who we're going to be supporting. So one last plug, registration is now open for NYSAR's virtual business meetings, which begin on September 14th through October 7th. We're moving forward just like the National Association of Realtors did with an all virtual set of business meetings. I don't think you're really going to see a lot change, except we'll probably have an uptick in the number of members that are able to attend our legislative forum, that are able to attend our working groups from the legislative side. The bad news is, obviously, we're not going to be together. I think that's one of the best things about working for the realtors, working for a trade association, is getting the opportunity to really, honestly touch your friends and reach out and shake their hand and say hello and reconnect. The good news is you all don't have to drive 2 hours to Turning Stone to attend those meetings. You can do them in your dining room like we're having this meeting right now. And there's also no chance that I'm going to lose my next paycheck at the blackjack table, which typically happens when I visit Turning Stone. So I think that might be a win. So with that, Dan, back to you and Greg.
Thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate that. Yes, unfortunately, no Turning Stone, but you can just double down next year, right?
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Excuse me, John Leonardi had a question.
So, hello, Mike. Good to see
Hello,
you.
John.
Are there any really moderate Democrats in New York State that we should really support? I mean, let's look at the big picture here. In the short term, we're concerned with these 21 or 22 races. I get that. But where is New York State going to be in 5, 8, 10 years from now? Given that, in the next 3 years, we'll probably be 100 billion in the hole, and they're going to have to raise taxes. Crime is going to continue to go up. All those things that the mayor talked about, you have talked about. Isn't it time that instead of trying to play both sides, we start taking a strong stance and support those individuals in these 21 or 22 races that understand law and order, business, lower taxes, all those things that we stand for? Because if we don't, it's my personal belief in 5, 8, 10 years, there's not going to be a lot of people left to buy houses, and we may not have a lot of realtors. And I don't think I'm exaggerating.
Wow. Am I unmuted? There's a lot to unpack there, John. So let's take with first your comment about, are there actually any moderate Democrats in New York State? And there are. I can point to Tim Kennedy in your neck of the woods. I can point to, I'd say Senator Neil Breslin from Albany. So I'm only talking about the Senate right now because the Assembly is, it's not that it's lost, it's just there's such a lack of an opportunity for the Republican Party in that house that it's challenging for them. So on the Assembly side, yes. On the Senate side, I think there is. And actually in the Assembly side, there are too. You look at John McDonald here from the Capital District, Kerry Warner from the Capital District. Those are lawmakers that I have a personal relationship with. Pat Fahey, that I think do speak up about our issues. I just saw one comment pop up. Vinny had the comment that Tim Kennedy voted for the Tenant Protection Act. Right, that's true. He did. But the other side of that coin is the Tenant Protection Act is one issue, but Tim Kennedy has been there for us on a lot of other things, like our first-time home buyer bill that we've been supportive of, like our co-op transparency fight that we're supportive of, like the fact that he doesn't support completely canceling rent, for example, right? Like some of his colleagues do that are based in the 5 boroughs of New York City. outright cancel rent completely. And there are legislative efforts, there are bills in to do that. And so, right, so do we have state lawmakers that are batting 1,000 with us right now? One or two. But our challenge is to try and find lawmakers that are as moderate as we can possibly find here in New York State right now. John, you touched on one critical conversation that's happening not just in our space, but across business entities, business associations, trade groups like ours every day right now. My colleagues doing what I do for other groups are all facing the same real world challenges. And a lot of people after that Tenant Protection Act bill, which by the way, was probably done more on for political reasons than the actual substantiated need to make those changes, right? So let me talk about the Tenant Protection Act just for 1 second, and then we'll get to, John, this discussion about issues facing us versus what do we do as an organization? Who do we support? The Tenant Protection Act, remember, in that state Senate, for the last 40 years, you had Senate Republicans holding back any changes to rent laws in New York State. They didn't address them, they didn't touch them. And in fact, what the Senate Republicans did, and not saying this is wrong, this is politics, is they would force the governor, if the governor was a Democrat, and they would definitely force that assembly-led conference, that assembly-led house, the Democratic Assembly folks, when they got to the negotiating table every 4 or 5 years, by the way, because rent control expired, every time it expired, they would force Assembly Democrats to eat something they honestly didn't want to eat politically, right? So it was a cutback in, let's say, MCI improvements, or it was a decrease in the amount of money you could rent to have a rent stabilized apartment, or there was some other cut related to rent control, because they had Democrats over a barrel to get that done, because they needed Senate Republicans to get them to agree to something to cut a deal. So when the 2018 elections happened and Democrats took control of the Senate, there were probably 6 to 10 major initiatives within the first 2 weeks that the Assembly Democrats and the Senate Democrats railed through and rammed through, because they've been waiting 40 years to get this done. And importantly, the largest backer of Senate Republicans, right, to keep them in office for 40 years was big real estate money out of New York City. And they're not shy about telling you that. And by the way, Assembly and Senate Democrats knew that. And they weren't shy about saying, we're going to punish real estate for what they did to us over the last 40 years. So so there may be real reasons why they need to make changes in their eyes from a legislative perspective to that. But that whole conversation and change on the Tenant Protection Act was as political as it was legislative. To your question, John, about what do we do? Shouldn't we be backing only people? I've heard this from other realtor members, right? How do we back people like Tim Kennedy, for example, when he voted for the TPA? Well, here's our real world problem. If, let's say, we become a party where we only support candidates that back our issues, that only back our issues and don't vote against us at all, we very quickly will only be voting for, probably in large part, Republicans. And in Albany right now, as I lined out earlier today, Republicans, I think for the worse, don't have a voice in state government right now. And again, it is not close. In the Assembly, they're extremely muted. And Will Barclay and his conference, they're amazingly good to us, but it's difficult for them to get anything done when they're down in numbers 107 to 43 roughly. That's hard to get anything done. The state Senate right now, as I just mentioned, is 40 to 23. Those numbers are going to get worse, right? They're going to get worse for the reasons I just lined out: money and enrollment in several upstate New York districts. So what we're challenged with is the real world dynamic of they're in charge. Democrats are in charge. That's not changing anytime soon. Where can we build relationships to make sure that the worst of the worst doesn't happen, like good cause eviction and like cancel rent? And those are just two examples. And let's say the next one that I don't know what it is, let's say a 5% increase in the real estate transfer tax. Because
Michael,
I can't just worry about right now. I'm trying to worry about what we don't know is coming down the road in a year from now.
but given what you just said, forget the assembly. You're right, it's lost. But in the Senate, we have these opportunities to really invest in individuals that could possibly win that support our issues. And if we continue to play both sides, in my opinion, we're not getting any place with the people on the left. You said there were maybe one or two that really on the moderate Democrats that support
No, I didn't say
everything.
that. There are more than one or two.
Okay,
There is a,
but
there
whatever
are-
that
there is a
number
coali-
is.
There is a coalition of business-friendly Democrats in particular in the Senate, because some of those senators, respectfully, are purple districts, right? They're watching out for their own reelection. And John, let me be very clear: the Senate is as gone as the Assembly in terms of a power struggle. There is no struggle. It's over. It's 40 to 23 right now. And after November, it will be worse in terms of the imbalance.
I guess my point is then, and I'll just let it go because Dan is raising his hand, that if we continue down this path, we're never going to make any inroads, period. And I, for one, think that we got to take a stand and work with other like-minded associations in New York State and support candidates that support overall health in New York State. And that's, I'm fearful for the next 10 years in this state. That's all I'm saying.
Mike, I've got another question for you, and it's
Sure.
off of what John is saying. I guess the feeling is that we compromise our values when we support candidates like a Sean Ryan or somebody who's so far left that we know that they're never going to help us. Is there a reason why we should support candidates on the far left, even though their overall position is in opposition to what we stand for?
So I think it's too general to say they don't support our issues, right? I have to look at it as on an individual basis on 6, 7, 8 criteria that we're looking at right now in these RPAC questionnaires that we give to state lawmakers. So we haven't made a decision on the Sean Ryan race, on the Senate race. The trustees haven't decided where they're going yet on that race. So that's still up in the air, number one. Were we supportive of Mr. Ryan in the state assembly? Financially, tepidly. We weren't big supporters of him, right? Because he's a little bit more left that I think our association supports, in particular from Western New York. But my guess is Sean Ryan's going to walk into victory here. So our challenge is, now you've got another state lawmaker that's in office. You can't just ignore it, folks, right? You can't put your head in the sand and say, we're just going to say, well, we're not going to work with people because he doesn't agree with us. Well, that doesn't solve anything. I think it's our obligation, our duty, and our challenge to reach out to lawmakers that we think in the back of our heads don't agree with us. Well, you don't know till you ask, right? So I don't know Sean Ryan's position on, for example, good cause eviction right now, but we're going to have that conversation. I don't know Sean Ryan's position on cancel rent, right? I want to have that conversation too, because I need votes like Sean Ryan to push back against very, very, very liberal. Some people may say Sean Ryan's a liberal Democrat. You know what? Sean Ryan's not a Democratic socialist right now, and that's what we're facing in New York State, right? So you're right. Are we left of left in New York? Sure, we're definitely left. I already talked about. Welcome to New York, folks. This is all blue all the time right now, and I know it's hard for us to grasp that. We want to be a purple district or a purple state. We're not. We're a very, very blue state. Now there are different shades of blue, but we're all blue. I can tell you that in terms of government.
Greg?
Michael, real quick.
Yes.
I'm not saying that
John,
we
I
should.
thought you were done.
No, I can't. I can't help myself. I'm not saying not to work with them, but let's not support them financially. Let's not use our realtor money for individuals that we know don't support our environment.
Okay, so John, that's a cop out. That's too easy to say that. When you say they don't support our environment, so maybe they don't support 6 out of 10 things, right? Maybe they don't support 7 out of 10 things that we're advocating for or pushing for. Maybe they don't support the biggest one we're working on this year. But what about the issue next year? Or what about the other issue that they did back, like, let's say, anti-discrimination bill that we're supportive of in the legislature that, you know, we're trying to get done, or a fight against discrimination in co-op transparency. John, we're just not going to have people that are batting 10 out of 10 with us. And find me the lawmaker that does. I've got Republicans in downstate New York right now supportive of real estate transfer taxes. So in large part, this is not even a DRR issue. This is, you know, I think, look, generally Republicans are less supportive of tax increases, but that's not as hard and fast a position as it used to be in New York State. And in some cases, I find it harder and harder to find differences between both of the parties. But I think you're right, John. I think if the challenge for us in real world terms, John, is if we're not supportive of those elected officials with political funding of some sort, you're not at the table having a conversation. If our PAC doesn't allow me to go to a fundraiser, let's say Sean Ryan wins, and our PAC doesn't allow me to go to a fundraiser to visit Sean Ryan, how do I meet the senator's chief of staff, the person that's working on the issue that we care about, and to get that meeting to talk about our issues? Let me tell you, it's a lot harder to do. And I know that's crass, but that's politics.
Well, thank you, Mike. I think in the interest of time, we'll move on, and it's very, very nice to have the information here. So thank you again, Mike Kelly, for your discussion. John, you're right if we move on?
I felt like it was a debate, Greg, to be honest with you, not a discussion. But I look, maybe to be honest, I love John's candor, and I love the candor of really all of our members, and I don't mind the questions. It's just sometimes I don't have easy answers for us. And believe me, I share a lot of the same sentiments you have. And the challenge for us is, you know, moving forward, we have to try and continue to build these relationships because they're going to be there in office, whether we like it or not.
Well, thank you again, Mike Kelly. I appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to turn it back to Zach. Zach, you're back on. Hopefully your audio is a little bit better to finish up the National Association of Realtors slides.
Yeah, hopefully. Does that sound a little better, Greg? Okay,
Yep.
Great. I'm hoping that it was just a faulty headphone on my part. So my apologies, everybody, for cutting out earlier. In the interest of time, because I know we've been on here for a while. I only had a couple other things, so I won't put up my slides, but just kind of talking broadly about NAR's priorities. You know, refunding SBA programs, remote notarization, mortgage liquidity, making sure the mortgage market continues to be in a good place. Relief for landlords. I mentioned this earlier, I might have cut out, but essentially we want to make sure that the any sort of rental relief program is, if they are going to do evictions, eviction moratoriums, which we're not fans of, they need to have rental relief programs that are married up in timeline there. So landlords, property managers, and the like, and commercial members have the resources available to weather this storm because they still have bills due. Liability protections. This is a thing that's a big priority for Republicans in the Senate. This is something that, you know, if people follow guidelines and are responsible about things, we think there should be some liability protections there. Infrastructure. I'm not sure this is going to happen, but early on, it seemed like this is something that could happen as a part of a larger bill. I could be proven wrong, but things like broadband, which we heard the mayor talk about. It's becoming an increasingly important issue for me in the last hour as well. The funding for states and municipalities, as Mike mentioned, a lot of places are facing budget shortfalls. We've seen this play out even in good times. When you see a budget hole, where do people look to fill that? They look at things like transfer fees. They look at things like taxes on services, vacation rental taxes, all of those things that we have fought at the local and state level for years. We are worried and worried about those sorts of things down the road. We are trying to stay ahead of this. That's part of the reason we're pushing for this hard at the national level. The other thing is on the commercial side of things, support for commercial landlords. They're hurting. A lot of the industry's really, getting a toll taken on them from COVID. The commercial members are really feeling it. So there was a recent bill that would just provide support for commercial practitioners to help meet their rent obligations or their bills, and to help the secondary market there for commercial mortgage-backed securities. The other big thing was the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. This rule was replaced by the Trump administration a few weeks ago. NAR is not happy about this. We have voiced input on this since it originally was proposed by the Obama administration. This is a rule that goes all the way back to the Fair Housing Act being enacted. The Trump administration rescinded the Obama rule. They replaced it. We have a lot of concerns about this and it not providing certainty for communities and enacting the civil rights provisions of the Fair Housing Act. We think there'll be a lot of litigation about this. We have voiced this concern to HUD and will continue to do so. But with that, with what time we have left, I definitely want to open up to questions. I know I went through a lot and I'm not sure where I cut off. So if people have questions about what's going on, I'm going to share my slides with Dan so he can share it with you all. But my contact information is in there. So if you have any questions individually, please reach out.
Greg had to leave, so I'm now chairing the meeting. Does anybody have any questions for Zach? Okay, please reach out to Zach directly if you have any questions. He's given you his, I believe, your email address, right, Zach? And how to.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. Also, by the way, we also are recording this whole meeting, so if you're having a good time now, you can repeat it. Okay, everybody, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to be, I know you'd love to hear me talk for an hour or so, but we're going to go fairly quickly. You're going to have to interrupt me if you want me to stop at any point. The RPAC report, right now we have 983 contributors who have donated $50,657 to RPAC. We are 82% of our goal for contributors and 72% of our goal financially. I know you haven't had a lot of visibility or been in touch with coworkers. Please spur them on to contribute. Also, if you've given, please give again. On the Government Affairs Director report, fair housing signage. This was actually addressed last year. It keeps coming up. John, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, real quickly. Hello, everyone. We are going to be sending out an additional guideline. We have a board meeting next week, I have an executive meeting, but basically the rule is any kind of advertising or marketing you do, your business cards, your website, your lawn signs, all must have the Fair Housing logo. Right now, the awnings do not, if you have a building with an awning, it doesn't need a Fair Housing logo. We've been working with the city of Buffalo. They've been very helpful. Our legal counsel, Charlie Martirana, has been working with the city council, city attorney. And there is an inspector in the city of Buffalo who's going around. There will be no fines, even though this individual threatens with fines. But everyone will have till September 30th to comply with the regulation that has been out there. And we're going to get some additional information within the next week. Any questions? Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, John. Yeah, regarding the fair housing, please check out the BNAR website. We'll keep you updated and what your obligations are for that. Next, Chris Jacobs, FPC. Chris Jacobs, we've been supportive of Chris ever since he was a little guy as clerk, all the way up to now being a congressman. Our new federal political coordinator for Mr. Jacobs is Jim Knight. So congratulations, Jim. We think you'll do an excellent job, and thank you for jumping in. Also, it's not on the agenda, but we also submitted to Mayor Brown. John did some research on repurposing vacant federal, state, and local buildings for the use to supply housing for the homeless, low-income people, veterans, and we'll be working with the city, possibly doing a study on what we can do with that and see if we could get that going forward. Mike Kelly already spoke about the contested local elections. I don't think there's any reason to go into detail on that. Does anybody have any questions for me as the Government Affairs Director or for the chairperson? Okay, with that being said, BNAR Board of Directors meeting is on Wednesday, August 26th at 10 a.m. It will be a virtual meeting. The NISAR fall meetings, Mike Kelly mentioned, there'll be virtual meetings as well from September 14th through October 7th. If there is no other issues or questions, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I want to thank Mike Kelly and Zach Rubin McCary for speaking today, along with Mayor Brown, whose schedule is almost as busy as ours. So everybody be well. Again, this will be on the website. I want to thank everybody for their participation.